There's a point in every difficult journey that almost nobody talks about honestly. Not the beginning, where the energy is fresh and the vision is clear and everything feels possible. Not the end, where the effort is validated and the result is visible and the story makes sense. The middle, that specific, unglamorous, profoundly uncomfortable place where the initial enthusiasm has worn off. The results have not yet appeared. The road behind you is long enough to be exhausting, and the road ahead is still too long to feel encouraging. Where the people who were cheering when you started have moved on to other things. Where the daily work has stopped feeling heroic and started feeling like just another day of doing something that may or may not be working. That is the place where most people stop. Not because the goal was wrong, not because they lacked ability, not because the effort wasn't real, because they hit a specific threshold of discomfort, held there long enough without visible reward, and the internal voice made a very compelling argument for stopping. And here is what nobody tells you about that threshold. It is almost always located right before something shifts. Not as a guarantee, not as a poetic metaphor, as a pattern so consistent in human experience that it deserves to be named and understood. The point of maximum difficulty in any genuine growth process is almost never the beginning of the end. It is the end of the beginning. And what comes after it, for the person who does not stop, is fundamentally different from anything that came before. This video is about that threshold, and about what happens when you cross it instead of turning back. Let's start with something that sounds obvious, but changes everything when you actually absorb it. Exhaustion is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of effort. An effort at the level that produces real change produces real exhaustion. Not the mild tiredness of a comfortable day. The bone deep, not sure if I can do this anymore kind that arrives when you've been pushing genuinely hard for long enough that the reserves are running low. Most people interpret that exhaustion as a signal to stop, as a message from reality that what they are attempting is too much, that the difficulty is too high, the return too low, the path too long. But exhaustion at that level is not a warning. It is a confirmation. It is the confirmation that you are operating at a level you have not operated at before, that you are asking more of yourself than your previous version was asked of, that the territory you are in is genuinely new and genuinely demanding, which is exactly what is required for genuine growth. No meaningful capability was ever built without the exhaustion that precedes it. No real strength developed without the resistance that produces it. The person who stopped every time they were tired never found out what they were capable of, because finding out requires staying in the difficulty long enough for something to change. When you feel the specific exhaustion of genuine effort, the right question is not should I stop? It is what is this building in me that I could not have built any other way? Because something is being built, even when the external results are not yet visible. Even when the progress feels invisible and the effort feels thankless and the voice is making the case for rest. The exhaustion you feel is the proof of the work. And the work is building something that will matter long after the exhaustion is gone. There are two kinds of pain available to you: the pain of growth and the pain of regret. They are not equal. They do not feel the same. They do not produce the same things in a person or in a life. The pain of growth is temporary. It lives in the difficulty of the present moment, in the effort that is being demanded right now, in the discomfort of pushing past what was previously comfortable. It is real, it is often significant, and it passes. What leaves behind when it passes is capability, strength, the expanded understanding of what you are able to handle, the quiet confidence of someone who has been through something hard and come out the other side. The pain of regret is permanent. It does not live in the difficulty of the present moment. It lives in the future in every moment where you encounter what you could have had if you had stayed. It is not acute the way the pain of growth is. It is chronic. It surfaces at unpredictable moments, in the silence, in the comparisons, in the question that has no answer because the answer would have required a different choice. What if I had stayed? That question, once installed, does not leave. It becomes part of the furniture of your inner life, showing up in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the things you're doing to fill the time you could have spent building the thing you stopped building. The person who stops at the threshold of difficulty avoids the pain of growth. But they do not avoid pain. They trade it for something that lasts considerably longer. This is not meant to frighten you into continuing. It is meant to clarify the actual choice. When the exhaustion arrives and the voice says stop, the real question is not whether you want to feel the difficulty of continuing. It is whether you want to feel the difficulty of stopping. Because both options carry difficulty. The question is which one you can live with. The answer, for most people who have genuinely reflected on it, is clear. Let's talk about the voice. The internal voice that tells you to stop. That explains, very logically and often very persuasively, why this particular moment is the right time to rest. Why the effort has been enough. Why the results should have appeared by now if they were going to appear. Why the sensible thing, the mature thing, the responsible thing is to accept your limits and make peace with where you are. That voice sounds like wisdom. It often sounds like self-compassion. It is very good at presenting itself as the reasonable alternative to reckless persistence. But here is what that voice actually is. It is your comfort zone. The part of you that was shaped by every previous experience of difficulty, that learned at some point that the way to survive hard things is to avoid them, that has been practicing the art of finding reasons to stop since the first time stopping brought relief. It is not your enemy. It is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to protect you from a specific kind of exposure that genuine effort requires. But it is not always right. The voice that says you have done enough was calibrated to the version of you that existed before you started this. It does not know what you are becoming. It does not have access to what is on the other side of the threshold you are currently standing at. It only knows how to measure the current discomfort against the remembered comfort of stopping. Learning to recognize that voice is one of the most important skills available to any person trying to build something real. Not to silence it, not to fight it, simply to recognize it for what it is. To hear the argument it is making and say, clearly and without drama, I see you. I know what you are, and I'm going to keep going anyway. Because every time you continue past the point where that voice told you to stop, you're doing something that accumulates over time into a new kind of identity. The identity of someone who can be trusted to keep going, who does not negotiate with the comfort zone at the moment of maximum difficulty, who has learned through repeated experience that what lives on the other side of the threshold is always worth more than what was offered by stopping. Now let's talk about the thing that makes the threshold crossable. Purpose, not motivation. Motivation is a feeling. It fluctuates with mood, with energy, with how recently you slept and ate and received encouragement. Motivation is real and useful, but it is not a reliable fuel source for the long middle of any meaningful pursuit. Because the middle is exactly where motivation goes quiet. Purpose is something different. Purpose is not a feeling. It is a direction. It is the clear, deeply held understanding of why this specific effort matters to you. Not why it would be nice to succeed. Why the attempt itself is necessary. What would mean at the level that is most honest and most personal to give up on it. When the exhaustion is high and the results are not yet visible and the voice is making its case, motivation cannot hold you there. It does not have the structural strength for that kind of sustained pressure. But purpose can, because purpose is not dependent on how you feel today. It is connected to something that does not change with the weather. Most people pursue goals without a genuine connection to purpose. They know what they want, and they have a plan for getting it, and they begin with energy and intention. But when the difficulty arrives, and the energy fades, and the intention needs to be renewed from something deeper than enthusiasm, there is nothing there. No deeper root. No genuine answer to the question of why this still matters when it costs this much. Find the why that holds. Not the one that sounds good. The one that is actually true. The one that, when you sit with it quietly and honestly, still makes the effort feel necessary rather than optional. And then return to it. Every day, every time the voice tells you to stop, return to the why that brought you here. Not as a ritual, as a genuine act of reconnection with the reason the effort was never optional in the first place. That connection is what makes the threshold crossable. Not talent, not resources, not favorable circumstances. The clarity of purpose that makes stopping feel like a worse option than the difficulty of continuing. There is a specific phenomenon in every meaningful pursuit that almost nobody prepares you for. The point of maximum difficulty almost never arrives at the beginning. It arrives after you have already invested significantly. After you have put in enough that stopping feels like loss. After the initial energy has faded and the sustained effort has begun to cost in ways that enthusiasm does not cover. And it arrives just before something shifts. Not always, but with enough consistency that it deserves to be named. The darkest point in most genuine growth processes is not located at the beginning, where the difficulty is fresh and the motivation is still high. It is located somewhere in the middle, after the investment has accumulated and before the return has materialized. And because it arrives at that specific location, it carries a particular kind of despair. The despair of someone who has already given a great deal and cannot yet see what it was for, who has paid the price without yet receiving the product, who is being asked to keep paying without any visible evidence that the account is real. That despair is one of the most honest feelings available in the middle of difficult work. It is not weakness. It is not a sign that the wrong path was chosen. It is the natural response to being in the hardest part of something real. But it is not information about whether to continue. It is information about where you are. And where you are at the point of maximum difficulty is closer to what you are working toward than you were at the beginning. However much you have given, you are now further along than you were. The investment has accumulated. The foundation is deeper than it appears from inside the difficulty. The question is not whether the despair is real. The question is whether you're going to let it make your decisions for you. Let's talk about something that is easy to miss when you're inside the difficulty. Progress is almost always invisible before it is visible. Not as a consolation, as a mechanical reality of how growth works. The changes happening in you while you're doing the hard work are not immediately measurable by external results. The capability being built, the character being formed, the resilience developing, the understanding deepening, none of that shows up in the scoreboard while it's happening. It shows up later, sometimes much later, in a result that looks sudden from the outside, but was actually the culmination of a long, invisible process. Most people evaluate their effort by its visible output at any given moment. And during the invisible phase, the visible output is low, which produces the reasonable but incorrect conclusion that the effort is not working. But the effort is working in a place you cannot see yet, in the person you are becoming, in the foundation being laid beneath what will eventually be visible. The people who quit during the invisible phase never see the visible results. Not because the results were not coming, because they were gone before the threshold was crossed. The people who stay through the invisible phase eventually find themselves on the other side of it. And what they discover, there is not just the result. It is the understanding, deeply personal and impossible to transfer by description, of what consistency through difficulty actually produces. That understanding changes everything that comes after, because now they have the evidence, not theoretical evidence, lived evidence, that the invisible phase is real, and that what it builds is real, and that staying through it produces something that quitting could never have made available. You are in the invisible phase right now. What you're building is real. Stay. Let's talk about consistency, because this is where the real work lives and where most people underestimate what is actually happening. The culture of achievement celebrates intensity, the dramatic effort, the extreme commitment, the visible breakthrough. And intensity has its place. There are moments that require everything you have. But intensity is not what builds lasting things. Consistency builds lasting things. The daily, ordinary, unremarkable decision to do the thing you said you were going to do. Not brilliantly, not always willingly, not with the kind of effort that anyone would admire from the outside. Just consistently, day after day, even on the days when the energy is low and the results are invisible and the progress feels impossibly slow. Here is what most people do not understand about consistent effort over time. The early days produce almost nothing visible. The graph looks flat. The needle barely moves. And if you're evaluating the effort by the external results of the first weeks or months, the logical conclusion is that it is not working, that the investment is not producing a return, that it is time to try something else. But the graph is not flat. The growth is happening beneath the surface, building foundations, establishing patterns, developing the internal capacity that the visible results will eventually stand on. And it does not become visible until it crosses a threshold that looks from the outside like sudden progress, but is actually the accumulation of all the invisible days that came before it. The people who quit in the early phase never see the visible progress, not because it was not coming, because they were gone before it arrived. The people who stay, who keep doing the unremarkable daily work through the invisible phase, eventually cross that threshold. And what they find on the other side is not just the result they were working toward. It is the person they became by doing the work long enough for it to produce results. That person is more capable, more resilient, more grounded in an understanding of what they can handle than the person who started. Because the consistency built something in them that the result itself could never have built. There is one more dimension to this that most conversations about persistence skip over. What you say to yourself while you're doing the work matters. Not as decoration, not as a mood enhancer, as a genuine shaping force on what your mind sees, what it expects, and therefore how it responds to what arrives. If your internal dialogue while you're working is primarily about how tired you are, how long this is taking, how uncertain the outcome is, how much easier it would be to stop, your mind will find evidence to confirm all of those things. It will notice the difficulty more than the progress. It will amplify the uncertainty. It will generate more reasons to stop than reasons to continue. But if your internal dialogue is different, if you have learned to say to yourself things that are genuinely true and genuinely useful, things like this is building something, I'm capable of this, every day of continuing matters, even when I cannot see how, your mind searches in a different direction. It finds evidence of progress that the other version would have filtered out. It generates more reasons to continue than to stop. This is not toxic positivity. It is not pretending the difficulty does not exist. It is choosing deliberately and repeatedly what you give your attention to while the work is happening. And attention is not neutral. Where it goes determines what you find. And what you find determines what you do next. Examine what you are saying to yourself in the hardest moments. Not the words you would say if someone were listening. the actual internal commentary that runs while you're pushing through something difficult. And then ask honestly, is this helping me, or is this making it harder than it needs to be? Because the difficulty itself is already real. You do not need your own mind adding to it. Before this video ends, I want to say something directly to whoever is at that threshold right now. The place where the exhaustion has arrived, where the results are not yet visible, where the voice is making a very good argument for stopping, where the comfortable version of your life is closer than the version you're trying to build. Do not stop now. Not because the outcome is guaranteed. It is not. Not because the effort will definitely produce what you are hoping for. It may not. Not because persisting always leads to the result you wanted. Sometimes it leads somewhere unexpected. Sometimes it leads somewhere better. Do not stop because of what the continuing builds in you that the stopping never could. Because the version of yourself that emerges from staying through the threshold is not the same as the version that went in. They are genuinely different people. The one who stayed learned something about their own capacity that cannot be learned any other way. They carry a knowledge of what they can handle that changes how they face every difficulty that comes after. They have the evidence, drawn from their own experience, that they are capable of more than the moment of maximum difficulty suggested. That evidence is permanent. It does not fade when the specific difficulty does. It becomes part of how you understand yourself, part of the foundation from which everything else is built. And the version who stopped does not have it. They have the relief of having chosen the comfortable option, which is real and which fades. And they have the question that stays. What would have happened if I had kept going? You are not at the beginning of your story. You are in the middle of it. And the middle is hard. It was always going to be hard. The hard was never a sign that something had gone wrong. It was always part of the path. Stay on it. What you're building is closer to being visible than it has ever been. What you are becoming is more real than it has ever been. And both of those things are worth more than the relief of stopping now. Keep going. If this video moved something in you, if something you heard today made you stop and think, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel. There is so much more to explore together. See you in the next one.